I ask myself a simple question. What one piece of art really captures the essence of Frank Frazetta? And there's 100 different answers to this question. Everybody's got their own theories about this. But for me, the one piece that really typifies what Frazetta is all about is that Men's Magazine illustration from 1962, where the girl is floating in front of the man who's rising up. There's a little machine on the right-hand side. And why I think it captures the essence of Frazetta is because this is what Frazetta is all about. He's all about the erotic, the erogenous, the sexual. Here's a woman rising up. She's seducing another man. This is what Frazetta's art does. It seduces us. It seduces us intellectually. It seduces us through the eye. It seduces us viscerally. And the man is obviously enchanted. He is bewitched. He's in the thrall of this particular woman who is undressing in front of his eyes. And this is Frazetta. This is Frazetta encountering the whole region of the erotic. And this is what Frazetta is really all about in his art. And look at the face on that woman. He never drew or painted a better face. There are so many qualities in that face. She's seductive again. She's erotic. There's a lot of comfort in that face. There's explicit sexuality in that face. There's a little sluttiness in that face. It's all there. It captures everything that Frazetta feels about a female. So that's what I think captures the essence of Frazetta, is a drawing like that. What a brilliant drawing. And the man, of course, is done in a very visceral way. All that rendering on his back, everything that's done to emphasize the physicality of the man. Once again, this is Frazetta. The physical man, the seductive woman. This is the essence of what Frazetta's art is all about. If you look at the preliminary sketch pages, and in the auction there are 2 double-sided sketch pages, and Frazetta put a lot of effort into this particular drawing. And he was constantly drawing and redrawing the female, trying to capture just the right proper expression for that particular form. And he was just having fun. You can look at these pages, and here is a great mind at play. And he's flipping the woman around, turning her around, changing her face, changing her body position. And in the midst of all this, he draws a single caveman. Who's that caveman? It's Frazetta. Because Frazetta subconsciously is saying, with all of this female pulchritude around me, I've got to be in that. I've got to be watching that. I've got to be a presence within all of that. And so there he is as the caveman, watching all of these women dance and cavort around him. This is what makes Frazetta's art so special. I've always said a Frazetta piece of art can hang comfortably in any museum in the world. His great art, his great drawings are as good as anything. I recall going into the Frazetta museums many occasions. The first opening in 1986, the opening in 2000 of the third museum, the second museum in Boca Grande, the 1977 exhibit that was in East Stroudsburg, organized by Charlie Roberts. I've seen people walk through the door of these exhibits, these museums, and simply start to cry. They were simply affected that deeply. How often do you see that today? Go to any museum in the world. What are you going to see? You'll see people texting, they'll have their phone out, they'll be setting themselves up to take a selfie with a picture, but they won't be impacted by the picture. They won't be affected deeply by the art they're looking at. With Frazetta, it's a different thing. When a person confronts a Frazetta and understands that picture, it affects them deeply. It affects them on many different levels. And in many cases, it unleashes a flood of emotions. So tears down the face in front of a Frazetta piece, I've seen that time and time again. Take the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Take 50 of the greatest Frazetta pieces, put them in a room. I guarantee you those pieces will outdraw any other room. I just guarantee it. A friend of mine a couple of years ago sent me a picture from the Louvre, and he was in the room with the Mona Lisa. Mona Lisa's sitting on a corner wall all by itself, big piece of bulletproof glass in front of it. The room is packed like a subway station, people everywhere. My friend went to the far corner of the room. He raised up his iPhone, took a picture, and he sent it to me. And in that picture, what do you see? Everybody's looking at their phone. Everybody's texting. Everybody's maybe jockeying for position to get a picture of the Mona Lisa with themselves as a selfie on their iPhone. Nobody's sitting there staring at the Mona Lisa. Nobody's having the experience of looking at the art. The Mona Lisa has ceased to be a piece of art. It's now a piece of celebrity. It's a piece of something you want to be near for whatever personal reason you have. It's a little piece of you wanting to be on reflected glory next to it. But as a direct experience of art, it just doesn't exist anymore. And most museums are that way. The great thing about Frazetta is it transcends all that. And it's still possible to have a direct connection with the art because that art lives so intensely. Why does that art live so intensely? Because Frazetta, first and foremost, is not an artist. He's many, many other things. He's a father, he's a husband, he's a great-grandfather, he's a hunter, he loves guns, he loves music very, very deeply. Probably the most important thing in his life were cameras. Nothing was more important to Frazetta than cameras. When he had his first stroke in 1995 and I came up to visit him, the first thing he told me, he garbled it out. He said, "Dave, this is the lens. Go to my studio. Get me that lens. I just want it." I said, "Do you want the camera?" No, just bring the lens." He just wanted to have a certain lens in his hand. It had a certain coating on it. It had a certain color. He wanted to feel it. He wanted to have it with him. It's almost like people from the Middle East that use worry beads or Christians that use rosaries. They just want to have it. It's very comforting. It enables them to live more deeply in the moment. With Frazetta, that was always photography. And photography with Frank had absolutely no connection to his art. Nothing at all. It was simply a hobby, something he enjoyed doing with tremendous passion, but he didn't really use it in the service of his art. That was something completely separate. So it's Frank the man that really has to be understood. All that life, all that living, all that intensity, all of that emerges in his art. That's what makes his art so great. Because of that flow of life, because of that experience of life that you feel from a great Frazetta piece, whether it's a drawing, whether it's a painting, whether it's a watercolor study or a simple sketch, it all is filled with that kind of life. And that's why when people present me with forgeries and I tell them, look at it, it doesn't feel like a Frazetta. There's no energy coming off of this piece. There's hundreds of forgeries out there. You have to be very, very careful. But a real Frazetta piece, it'll hit you right between the eyes. It'll affect you right in your gut. It'll affect you right in your mind. You can't get beyond it. That sense of life that comes off the paper, that comes off the canvas, you respond to it immediately. And this was the goal of Frazetta. Frazetta wanted to simply live as deeply, as passionately as he possibly could. He didn't want responsibility. He did take responsibility for his family. He provided for them. He provided for his children. He was the finest father I've ever seen. He bought them cars. He bought them houses. He bought them businesses. He took care of all of his kids. But what he wanted to do himself, he wanted to live freely. He wanted to live an unencumbered life. He wanted to live with a sense of total freedom so that when he got up in the morning, he wanted to say to himself, well, what can I do today? What do I want to do today? Do I want to shoot some pictures? Do I want to shoot some guns? Do I want to do some art? Do I want to walk around? Do I want to take a trip into Manhattan? What do I want to do? He wanted that openness. That's what Frazetta was all about. This is going to be my last video about Frank. There's many, many more things to say. But I just wanted to just give once again a little sense of what the man is all about because I knew him so well. I mean, we were dear, dear friends. We talked all the time. I moved away from him in 2003 and moved out west. And so I didn't see him from 2003 to 2010, although we did talk on the phone. There were plans of him at the end. He was going to take a plane ride and come out and visit me in Las Vegas. Unfortunately, that never happened. But here's an interesting story that gives you another aspect of Frazetta. It was, in the fall sometime, I forget. Frank had just bought a new car. For many, many years, Frank drove a Cadillac. He loved Cadillacs. For a man of his generation, for a man of that time period, the Cadillac was the ultimate status symbol. If you had a Cadillac, it meant you made it. You were a success. Frank could drive around with a giant smile on his face, see his friends, and they all knew he was a raging success because he was in a Cadillac. Well, times change. People started to buy BMWs, they started to buy Mercedes. That became the new status symbol. Frazetta thought, it's time. He traded in his Cadillac, he bought a Jaguar. A nice black Jaguar. And this was at a time when Jaguars still had the cachet of being a Jaguar. It was before it became a dumbed down Ford. So I came to visit Frank. He took me out. He showed me the car. He said, let's go take a ride. And on that particular day, his mother had called him. And somebody had brought over a very, very early piece of art that Frank hadn't seen in years and years and years. Frank had done it in the early 1940s. And it was basically, I saw a Polaroid of it. It was basically a city scene, a very fantastic city with interesting rooftops and a couple little people walking around. And it was almost in the funny animal style, but yet the Frazetta realism was part of it. Fascinating piece. I don't know how big it was. And Frazetta thought it was pretty good. And his mother had it. He wanted to drive into Brooklyn to pick it up. So he said, Dave, let's go into Brooklyn. Let's go pick up this piece. I said, fine. So we get into the Jaguar. I open up the door. I get ready to go in. Luscious, lavish, luxurious, leather, butter soft, as nice as a luxury car can be. Frank was beaming with pride as he got into the car, looking at me because he knew how impressed I was. Frank loved to impress people. So I sat in the seat and Frank said, get that cassette tape out of there, will you, Dave? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, by the ashtray. And I hadn't noticed. I looked at the ashtray with absolute horror. I look at the ashtray and there's a giant pyramid of ashes on this ashtray that was pulled out. And I said, Frank, what are you talking about? He said, there's a cassette in there. Just grab that, will you? So I reached in this little pyramid of ashes. I looked at Frank. I grimaced. I pulled it out. I opened the door. I shook it out. I rubbed it off. I gave it to Frank. Frank pulled the ashtray out. He shook it out. He said, don't worry about it. Put the ashtray back in. He brushed off the cassette tape a little more. We started driving down the road. He stuck the tape in. What the tape was about a 90-minute selection of jokes by Rodney Dangerfield. Frank loved Rodney Dangerfield. He knew all the jokes by heart. So all the way down the road to Brooklyn, Frank is giving me his imitation of Rodney Dangerfield and just giving me all of his little versions of all the jokes. Hilarious. What a wonderful trip. Frank loved old traditional comedy. The Three Stooges, the Marx Brothers, Buster Keaton, you name it. He loved all those traditional comedians. Didn't care so much for the modern comedians. He didn't care so much for the scatological approach to humor. He liked traditional slapstick and traditional verbal humor. He just absolutely loved it. I guess that takes him back to his Little Abner days. He loved the cartoonistry of the whole thing. So in any case, after that trip, we get into Brooklyn, go to his mother's house. In typical Frazetta fashion, his mother forgot where she put the piece. So we spend about 10 minutes looking through the house, can't find it. Frazetta says, hell with it, let's go. He didn't want to stay around any longer. His father wasn't around. His father was about to come back. For some reason, Frank didn't want to see his dad. We took off. He said, let's go down to the ballpark. I'll show you where I used to play. So he was going to take me down to the high school where he had all of his great moments. Frank was a tremendous high school player and allegedly threw a ball 400 feet, made all sorts of incredible plays on the field. He was written up in the newspapers. He was constantly leading the league in batting percentage. He was a tremendous athlete. You have to give him that. So we go to the ballpark and we get out of the car and Frank's getting ready to talk about all of his events in the field. And I notice out of the corner of my eye a guy walking down the street with a bag of groceries. And he's staring at Frank, staring at me. And he comes a little closer. And the guy looks, he puts down his bag of groceries and he says, Fritz, is that you? I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Frank, Frazetta, Fritz, that's you, isn't it? Frazetta looks at him and says, yep. And Frank was a little hesitant. He didn't know. He didn't want somebody approaching him on the street. And then I think Frank had a little glimmer of recognition of who this guy was. And this guy comes up and he says, oh man, he says, I'll never forget you. He said, you're fantastic. You're unforgettable. I mean, what a great ball player you were. You were the golden boy in this school. I remember you got all the girls. Everybody was jealous of you. Man, I mean, you were the number one. You were the big man here. He says, I can't believe I bumped into you. I heard about you, he said. He said, you're a big shot artist now. Man, you got to be rich. You moved away. What the hell are you doing here? He says, man, it's good to see you. And Frank said, I'm just, looking at the ballpark, taking my friend and showing him around a little bit. And the guy looks at me and he says, let me tell you something about your friend. Talking about Frazetta. He said, let me tell you something that happened. There used to be a guy in the school, big bully, big fat guy, big guy. Had to be 6'2", 6'4". Everybody was afraid of him. And he used to always tease Frank. He always wanted to fight him in the hallway. Frank never wanted to fight in the hallway because he's afraid he'd get thrown out of school and he'd lose his place on the baseball team. He wasn't stupid. And this guy was always teasing Frank until Frank eventually said, look, let's go meet out in the parking lot after school. Guy said, okay, it's about time. It's about time. He said, what a pussy you are. It's about time you agreed. Okay, I'm going to meet you. You better be there. You better be there or the whole school's going to know about it. So the guy goes on to say, well, everybody heard about this fight that was about to take place. It's like a movie scene. Everybody's out there waiting in the parking lot. This big bully's out there. And, he bullied everybody. It wasn't just Frazetta. He just took advantage of it. He's just a big blowhard kind of guy. But he was so big, nobody wanted to confront him. So he's out there talking how he's going to beat the crap out of Fritz. And that's going to be the end of it. And he's going to beat him so badly, he's never going to play baseball again. Forget it. So he's there, everybody's watching. Frank comes out, walks up, looks at him, doesn't say a word, just keeps staring at him. All of a sudden, like lightning, he hits him with a right. His face goes over to the right, hits him with a left, and the guy just falls on his back. And I remember thinking to myself, is this guy going to bounce? No, he's too fat. He's not going to bounce. Frank knocked him out. He fell backwards. He just went down. He went completely down. 2 punches, a right, a left, out, gone. I'll never forget it. It was incredible. And Frank, you never said a word. You never said a goddamn word to this guy. You just looked at him. And then you looked at all of us. And then you just walked away. It was like a scene out of a movie. I hope somebody films a scene like that because it was great. And man, that guy never bothered you again. That was the end of it. So he says, Jesus, good to see you. And he walks away and they say their things. And Frazetta looks at me after the guy leaves and he says, I never remembered that until just now. And now I remember it like it was yesterday. Yeah, I remember that. I'll show you exactly where it took place. Yeah, I knocked him out. I hit him. He was a big blowhard. He was nothing. I knew he couldn't fight. I knew he had nothing. He said, but I'll tell you something, Dave, you're going to like this. I captured that moment. And I just remembered it now. In the end of the Johnny Comet strip, I was fighting that guy in the Johnny Comet strip. I had Johnny fighting that guy. I had him hitting him with a right, hitting him with a left, and he went right down. I put it right in the comic strip. It's in that daily. It's one of my favorite dailies. You got to look it up when you get home. We'll look it up when we get back to the house. Now I remember it. Man, I completely forgot about that. Oh yeah, that was pretty good. I hit him really good. That's Frazetta. That's Frazetta. Thanks again for listening to all the videos. Maybe we'll talk again at some point. Bye-bye.